And I'll give a more concrete example. In Colorado, in the Denver metro area, we spend $5 billion a year on food. And only, well, much less than 10% of that food actually comes from local sources. So right now we are exporting more than $5 billion outside of our community in order to be able to import the food that we need. And there's very few things that are as basic as food for the health and well-being of the community. And we also have, 200,000 people in the state that are unemployed and actively looking for a job. And those people have their obligations, their families that they're trying to take care of. Every person who becomes unemployed, that's one more step in the downward spiral of the economy, right? The fewer people that have healthy wages, that means the fewer people that can buy what they need, the fewer people that can actually pay their taxes and their obligations and their mortgage. And that impacts everybody. It just becomes this like flushing toilet where now all of these capacities are gone. So $5 billion a year or $6 billion a year is a huge opportunity for the community to figure out, well, how can we do that closer to home? Is there an opportunity for an innovative entrepreneur who is interested in community benefit to start producing some of these products that we need? So we think there absolutely is a huge market for local production of what's needed. And it isn't protectionistic. It isn't about those other communities can just suck it. That's not the response. That's not what it means, right? I grew up in Southwest Kansas, where agriculture is the only industry, and everything that you do is in support of agriculture. And what's happened over the last 50 years is that instead of having lots and lots and lots of farmers and ranchers that are, producing at a smaller scale, that are then able to work together and feed a lot of people, we now have had those, we've lost so many of those farmers, and we've gone from lots and lots and lots of farmers and ranchers to now huge companies that are the only ones able to provide the capital that's needed, that are the only ones able to produce at the scale that's necessary to make any money given, how we subsidize particular crops. So now we have communities that are literally, they're bleeding to death because they're racing to the bottom in order to meet particular commodity prices, and there's no capacity of the community. If one of those, agribusinesses decides to leave town, which they've done, then we don't have that capacity anymore to raise those cattle or to, produce that beef or to get it out of town. So my hometown is dying because we've centralized all of this production and all of this capacity and ownership. And then when those businesses decide to leave town for someplace cheaper, that's what they do, and they've done it. And it leaves all of those people without anything except a job at Walmart. And that's not going to take care of them either. So it's not about that big business is evil. It's not about that we should be producing locally and forget everybody else. It's that what makes good economic sense? What is it that provides for a healthy economy? And a healthy economy isn't one where there's 10 companies in the world that own everything and that nobody else has the capacity to produce. It's actually about smaller nodes of production and capacity in interrelated communities where now you're able to import and export based on what's actually needed or on the excess capacity of a community, instead of it being about there's no way that we're going to have clean water unless we buy it from this corporation, or there's no way that we're able to have food unless McDonald's comes in and sells us food. And that isn't a healthy or resilient ecosystem of an economy.
So,
does that make sense?
Yes, and so local then is local. There's 100,000, there's 200,000 locals in the United States, if you will. Let's not look at the whole world, but that's the same is true. Local is local. So if the people in Springfield, Missouri, or in Pittsburgh, Kansas, or in Bedford, Oregon, along with Denver, Colorado, and Boulder, and Fort Morgan, started keeping stuff closer to home, buying more local, obviously everything can't come from there,
right,
then those communities would be strengthened across the country. And there would be less reliance on the big companies who have an enormous amount of influence and control over political policy, over what gets subsidized, what doesn't get subsidized, et cetera.
Exactly.
What is the state of kind of the local movement? Are there other national organizations? You're not the only person in the whole world that's doing this, obviously.
Right.
So what's kind of the state of things out in the world?
Yeah, there's a growing realization that maybe the economic policies of the last 50 years are not the best ones. And it's very difficult. That's a hard conversation and realization because we have so much momentum politically, financially, even emotionally. We have so much momentum behind believing that progress looks like having these big businesses doing business in our community.
And us consuming more as consumers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, more is better.
More is better.
The only way to solve the problem is to expand the economy.
Exactly. And it's systemic, and it's very difficult. It's difficult to change because there's so much momentum and alignment behind it, even though the evidence is building that it really is fundamentally unsustainable, and it doesn't make us happy. So there's a couple of places to look at, is this good business sense, and is it good for our community and our sense of well-being? So that growing questioning of those economic models and assumptions that we make, it's still a very new conversation for a lot of people. You know, I had a conversation with a policy contributor for one of the mayoral candidates for Denver, and they basically said, yeah, we love small business, and we're interested in supporting the local economy. And so I brought up the fact that in state and local and federal governments in the United States, we give more than $130 billion of subsidies to big corporations or incentives. So this isn't even, I don't even know that number includes some of the big subsidies to things like energy and agriculture. But we collectively give tons of community resources in trying to basically seduce big companies to come into our community and operate their business because they promise big returns.
A lot of jobs quickly.
A lot of jobs quickly,
we'll
tax revenue, we'll do this.
We'll hire 200, 300, 500,000 people.
Right, exactly. But what actually happens isn't always aligned with that. There are some businesses that are able to fulfill on that. But, you know, if we look at the numbers of what really happens, in the state of Colorado, there's a 5-year period from 2001 to 2006 where big businesses with more than 500 employees actually had a net job loss of 70,000 jobs in the state of Colorado. So even with the jobs that they created with their subsidies and their promises for prosperity, they lost 70,000 jobs. In the same period, businesses with fewer than 500 employees created 117,000 net new jobs. And most of those jobs, I think more than 90,000 of them, actually came from employers with fewer than 20 employees. So we give tons of tax subsidies and land grants and money to these huge corporations because they're promising to employ our neighbors. But what actually happens is that they kill jobs. But that isn't part of the dialogue. So when I'm talking to this policy director, I was like, yeah, except we give all this money to these big businesses, so we need to examine whether that's really a good policy for us, and how do we want to do this differently? And he said, well, the problem is that that's just how it's always going to be. So let's not talk about that, and basically let's put it off the table and talk about, you know, the marketing we can do for small business. And I was like, no. Let's put it back on the table because it's real. It's a real component of how we manage our economic development and our community resources. And I'm not saying that big businesses shouldn't exist. This isn't an anti-big business. They have their place in the global economy. They have the right to do business just like any other company. But right now we give them an unfair advantage. We give them subsidies and tax breaks that we never give to small business. And if we were to say to a small business, you know, we're willing to give $80,000 per job in tax subsidies for every job you're able to create that generates this much revenue. There are definitely small businesses that are very capable of doing that who will actually stay here in the community and who aren't going to pick themselves up and move when the next state over gives them a better deal. And that's exactly what happens right now. So there are real differences and real changes that we can make to our economic policies. But I didn't answer your question exactly. So to get back to your question...
That was nice. That was nice.
To get back to your question, there is a growing understanding of the difference that is being made. And you don't have to tell a small business or a local business why they matter, because they're very well connected to their impact and to the relationships they have with other small businesses. but we don't have a very loud voice. It's a much quieter voice out in the community. So there are two national organizations right now that are giving a much louder voice to those businesses, and they include the American Independent Business Alliance, or AMIBA, and the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, or BALI. And they collectively represent more than 100 groups across the U.S. and Canada in communities of all shapes and sizes who are asking the same question of what makes for a good economy and how do we build it? You know, if we've inherited these particular beliefs about business and what it looks like and the purpose of business and what economic development is supposed to be, how do we go from the momentum behind those current practices to something that actually works better? And so there's a lot of people all over the country who are asking that question and who are collectively working together to identify what policies are actually more equitable. How do we encourage those businesses to come into the community and say, yes, we're open for business, please come do business in Colorado, but we're also going to create a level playing field so that we're not giving you something we're not providing to our other businesses as well. There are lots of communities that are taking on those policies and figuring out how do we do this well.